Hello students, welcome to the fourth video of the Programming with Python playlist. I am assuming that you have already installed Python into your system. If you have not installed Python in your system, I would request you to go and watch the previous videos to do the same. So let's begin. There are two ways in Python to run your program. First, you can use the interactive interpreter prompt, which requires the use of Python shell. And the second way is to make your source code or to write your own Python program and then to execute it in the Python shell. The second option requires you to have a text editor or an IDE. Now let's say hello to the Python shell. As we know that Python is an interpreter language, it executes the code line by line. Python provides us with a Python shell, also known as Python interactive shell, because we can write our command into the Python shell and then it executes each command one by one to give us the result. The Python shell waits for the input command from the user, and as soon as the user enters the command, it executes it and it displays the result. Now, how to use the interpreter prompt to access the shell? In case of Windows, we can open our command prompt and type the command called Python and then press the enter key. It will give us the access to the Python shell. In case of GNU Linux or Mac OS, we have to open the terminal and then type Python 3 and then press enter. Please note that in this programming tutorial, we are using the Python version 3 as standard. Now, in order to close the prompt, you have to write the command exit with a parenthesis. However, there are alternatives to close the Python shell. In Windows, we can press Ctrl+Z followed by the enter. In case of GNU Linux or Mac OS, we can press Ctrl+D or Ctrl+Z to do the same. Now, let's try to do it into our Windows-based system. For that, let me go to the desktop. Over here in the search, let me search for CMD or command prompt. Let's press enter. As you can clearly see that the command prompt is open. Now we have to type Python. Now this is the interactive shell provided to us by Python. We can use the command print to print something into the terminal or into your Python shell. As you can clearly see that it's printing hello. Now this particular Python shell can be used as a calculator. We can perform simple additions like 3 plus 3 and the result is 6. We can perform the subtraction like 4 minus 2 or multiplication 6 star 7. In case of Python, the multiplication is given by star character. It's 42. Let's try to divide 5 divided by 3. As you can clearly see that the result, it turns out to be a fraction which is being showed as a floating point number. Let's try to do it with another term. Even with a standard division where we don't have any fraction, yet the value is shown as a floating point number with only single digit after the decimal point. So this is how you can use your Python interpreter or your Python shell to work it as a calculator. In order to exit this, you can type the command exit and then press enter. Now we are back to the command prompt and the Python shell is closed. The second way of running your Python code is to write your own Python program. A Python program, sometimes called as a script, with an extension .py is a sequence of definition and commands. A command which we often call as a statement in terms of Python program instructs the interpreter to do something. These definitions are evaluated and the commands are executed by the Python interpreter, or we can call it the Python shell. Typically, a new shell is created whenever the execution of program begins. So if you run your Python code twice, then new shell will be created for each execution. In most cases, a window is associated with this shell. Now, before we move into the Python shell to execute our Python program, we need to create our Python code. For that, we have to use either a text editor or an IDE. There are several text editors which you can use for the purpose. For example, we have Sublime Text 3, Notepad++, we have Vim, for your Linux and Mac OS based system. We have Genie, which is present in Windows, Linux and Mac OS. We have TextMate for Mac OS and gedit, which comes as the default text editor in case of your GNU Linux. If you use a KDE based system, in that scenario, your default text editor will be Kate. We can also use an integrated development environment. For example, the default one which is provided to us by Python is known as idle. There is another good IDE known as PyCharm, which is available as both educational edition and a professional edition. As a student, you can choose for the educational edition. Apart from that, you have an IDE called Spider, which is basically used for mathematical analysis. I personally prefer both PyCharm and Spider. But in this tutorial, to keep it simple, I will use the Sublime Text 3. As you can clearly see, I love Sublime Text. Now, you might be wondering where to save the Python code. Once you make a Python code with a text editor, you can store it in either of these three places. Apart from these three places, you can store it on your desktop in case of Windows. You can store it in your home folder in case of GNU Linux and Mac OS. To be honest, you can store it anywhere, but I prefer to store it under the C drive in case of Windows. Also, always ensure that your file extension is .py for the Python code. Now, in order to run your Python code which you have written under a text editor is to follow these three steps. The first step is to open a command prompt in case of Windows or a terminal window in case of your GNU Linux or Mac OS. Second step is to change your directory from your present working directory to the location where you have saved your file. For example, let us assume that we are storing our file in the drive C under the folder py. The third step is to run your program by entering the following command into your command prompt or terminal window depending on your operating system. In case of Windows, we have to write Python space the name of your file .py. In case of GNU Linux and Mac OS, you have to write Python 3 space the file name .py. So now let's try to do it on our own. Let me go to the desktop. Here, let me search for the command prompt. Let me put it on one side. Let me search for the Sublime Text. That's great. Now, let me try to write the first source code for Python. New file. Let me save it under the C drive. Right click over here. Make a new folder py. And let me name the file as foo.py. If you are wondering why Foo, because I love the band Foo Fighters. Anyways, let us try to print something. Print welcome to Python programming by Subhomoy. Let's print another line. Assistant Professor PDUAM Amjonga. Let's save it. File. Save. You can also use the shortcut Ctrl S to save your file. We have written our program. Let's go to the command prompt. Here, let us change the directory to py. The present directory is usr / the name of my user. Now let's change it to c py. Now let me check what are the files which are stored inside py. The command is dir. As we can see, we have our Python file named foo.py. Now let's use the command Python space foo.py. Press enter. As you can clearly see that the output contains both the lines which we have used in our program. So this is how you can run your Python program using your Python shell under command prompt. Let me close this and this. So that's all for today. By far now, you should be able to write, save, and run Python programs at ease. Now that you are a Python user, let's learn some more Python concepts in our forthcoming videos. Thank you